Hi, it's Colin Coward. I started The Volume to bring you some of the most authentic voices in sports. While you're here, make sure you hit subscribe. Thanks.
Another story today, Jim Harbaugh. Clearly him and Michigan are working, and they had the most successful season of their tenure last season. But it's kind of been weird ever since, right? I mean, it sure felt like he wanted the Minnesota Vikings job, and they would not offer him the job, which to me is a little crazy. If I was them, I would rather have Jim Harbaugh than Kevin O'Connell. Now, I get it from their general manager standpoint, who wants to control everything, and these GMs kind of want to operate now like it's basketball or baseball. But ultimately, you're only as good as a GM as your head coach. So if your head coach is good, you get credit because then you become good. Like, ultimately, Trent Baalke went to 3 conference championship games in the Super Bowl because of Jim Harbaugh. We saw him with Urban Meyer. I mean, he was holding on for his job for dear life, and he easily could have been fired. So you're only as good as a GM as your head coach. Part of the reason Ron Wolf became kind of a genius, because he hired Mike Holmgren. And then he traded for Brett Favre, and Holmgren created an MVP. Right? Like, who your head coach is makes you look good as a GM. So hiring Kevin O'Connell, it's pretty risky to me. And if you would have hired Jim Harbaugh, like, they would be in position, in my opinion, to be good immediately. Like, there wouldn't even be a question. If you said Jim Harbaugh is the Minnesota Vikings head coach, I'd be like 10 wins. But now he goes back to Michigan. Listen, Ohio State, my issue with Ohio State under Ryan Day, he has done a remarkable job coaching the quarterbacks and coaching offense and coaching skill guys. They have as explosive of an offense in the history of the school. What they did at the Rose Bowl, I mean, it looked like the greatest show on turf or something. It was stupid. They play no defense, though, because his mentor, Chip Kelly, despises defense. Every single one of Chip Kelly's teams are soft because all he cares about is offense. He's obsessed with offense. Ultimately, Ohio State, like in my lifetime, when they've been good, and they've been good the majority of my lifetime, but specifically these last 2 decades, they have been dominant on defense. Urban Meyer's teams, some of those 2000 Tressel teams, they would beat the living you-know-what out of it. They play like Georgia or Alabama or Urban Meyer's Florida teams. They go, we got pros on every single level, line, linebacker, secondary, and we're going to kick the shit out of you. So let's roll. Well, Ryan Day's team is like, yeah, we're going to score 50 points. We might give up 40. Like, that's... Now, they did hire a new defensive coordinator, the dude from Oklahoma State. But clearly, they just have better players than Michigan. Like, does Harbaugh know that's kind of a one-off situation? We're Aiden Hutchinson. I think they're losing another defensive lineman that's really good. Their team's just not more than likely be as good as they were last year. And the more and more, he's only beat them once. So as part of him jumping is he's just tired of college. He wants to go back to the pros. I don't blame him. He's not a college coach. He's a pro guy. Played in the NFL for 15 years. Coached multiple, went to 3 conference championship games. Do you know how many coaches in the history of the NFL would sell their left nut for Jim Harbaugh's resume in his 4 seasons? People act like Jim Harbaugh, and listen, I was going to all these games. That disastrous last season, they went 8-8. Do you know how many coaches in the history of the league would sign up for their lowest moment of their career in the pros was 500? That to me is what makes Mike Tomlin so impressive. Is Mike Tomlin's lows are not really that low. And his highs, he won a Super Bowl. When your lows are, I went 9-7, I went 8-8. Like, that's your lows. Like, most lows are, 4-12s, 5-11s. You got to add the game now, but I'm just still brain wired to go off the 16-game schedule. But you know what I mean. 4 or 5 wins. Harbaugh's low was 8. And if he was the Minnesota Vikings head coach, I think immediately, it's like, that's, if you listen, I argue with a lot of people about Kyle Shanahan. His lows have been pretty low. His highs have been pretty high. 4 playoff games in 3 years. And went to a Super Bowl. But his lows, I've seen him draft 2. Not ideal. Saw him draft 2. Saw him go 6-10 2 years ago. But his highs are high. That's the thing. I give McVay a lot of credit. That's why I think McVay has a chance to become kind of legendary these next couple years. I've seen McVay's low. His low was 9-7. He's gone to the playoffs 4 of 5 years. 4 of those with a guy named Jared, or I guess 3 of the 4 were Jared Goff. Won playoff games, went to a Super Bowl with Jared Goff. That's why I give McVay and Kyle a lot of credit. They've won playoff games with Jared Goff and Jimmy Garoppolo. You gave McVay, Matt Stafford, won a Super Bowl. Right? It's like LaFleur. I've been impressed with LaFleur. I think he's done a great job with Aaron Rodgers. They've kind of meshed the offense and letting Aaron do kind of a shotgun, spread it out with some of the Shanahan run concepts. And their offense the last couple of years, multiple MVPs. But what would he look like if I just gave him, an old Matt Ryan right? A Kirk Cousins, like, would he win 10 games or would he win 7? I don't know the answer. He's been lucky, and it's part of it is he took the job that had Aaron Rodgers, who needed a lot of work. So you get credit for that. But how many games would the Packers win if I just gave him Jimmy Garoppolo? Would they go to the playoffs? Maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't. Hell, we might find out if Aaron Rodgers bounces. So Harbaugh coming back, which to me is good for college football. Like, ultimately, and I'm a Jim Harbaugh, when I say fan, like, he entertains me. I like the Jim Harbaugh experience. I think he's better in college for the entertainment standpoint. And it feels inevitable. His buyout's like $3 million. He's going to come back to the pros. You know, you're always drawn where your heart is drawn. And I think there is an element to the NFL where it's just like, none of the, like the NIL, it still kind of feels shady, even though it's legal. Like in the pros, we just pay people. Like, we'll give you $10 million. We'll give you $5 million. We want you to be our defensive coordinator. Here's $2 million. We want you to be our starting defensive end. Here's $18 million a year, right? It's very black and white. It's like, well, we'll see if we can get this guy to sponsor us to give you $400,000 for NIL. And one take I have for NIL, I heard Coward talk about, he did a podcast with Daryl Morey, and before they got into the interview, he talked about Caleb Williams is going to make $5 million this year. $5 million from NIL. And I've been one of those people that I thought it was very disingenuous for a lot of the sports media that covers college sports that always acted like guys weren't getting paid. Guys were always getting paid, the top guys, in cold hard cash. That's the way it worked forever. Before I was born, and it's been going on up until the NIL. The top guys at the top schools were getting cash in basketball and football. Everyone knows about it. I mean, we have evidence. The feds did they caught all those people in college basketball. The going rate for college basketball players was like $150,000, $200,000. Now, you could say it's a little unfair. Their parents were getting money, whatever. But we can't act like they weren't getting paid. Now, $5 million, no one's getting $5 million. But here's what I would say. Caleb Williams, we saw him play last year at Oklahoma. Star player. I know this. If I was a businessman, I would be hesitant to get involved with my university paying recruits. One thing to give $20,000 here, $20,000 there. But if you wanted $500,000, $1 million to give one individual, half the college, like I saw The Athletic did this article of the top 100 recruits from, I think, 2018. It was Trevor Lawrence's class, so it might have been 17 or 18. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Field, it's one thing. But a lot of the names, guys are still in school. Guys never panned out. You know, some guys are in the pros. Half the guys are still trying to prove their worth. The ROI to be the question on if a guy's going to, you have absolutely no clue. Especially, at least in basketball, if I'm getting the number one overall recruit, the percentage chance in the history is Anthony Davis and Zion Williamson. Like, you have a long history of, like, most of the guys are pretty good. In football, you know, this guy's a top 20 receiver in the country. He could be the next Cooper Kupp, or he could be the next guy you've never heard of. So I do wonder how this plays out with some of these businesses, because they're going to cut a lot of checks, and the majority of players are not going to be Caleb Williams. They're not going to turn into Reggie Bush. They're not going to turn into Jamar Chase. Those guys are outliers. What do they always say? The 2% of guys from high school football go on to play the pros. And then a small percentage of people from college football, or excuse me, a small percentage of people, 2%, go on to play college football. And then a small percentage of the college football players go to the pros. Because most college players are just that, college players. Now, they have some value, but some of the numbers that I see these guys are getting paid, these millions upon millions of dollars, it's not going to pencil. Because you're going to be like, wait, I just gave $1 million to the star wide receiver coming out of Arizona if I'm the University of Texas. What if that guy never plays in 3 years? What if in 2 years he transfers? Now, there are going to be some guys that you feel very good about, like a Caleb Williams, like an Aiden Hutchinson, like Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson. But like I said, those guys are more closer to anomalies. Those guys are closer to not being the norm. Most guys, I remember when the Raiders drafted Mario Edwards Jr. in the second round. He came from Florida State, some of those good Jimbo teams, and it was like, they got this guy who was the number one overall high school recruit in the second round. And he was a good player, but if you would have paid him for what people thought he would have been like a top 5 pick, been an elite player, which he was not in college. Now, he's still in the NFL, and he's very talented, but like for every Jadeveon Clowney, for every Khalil Mack level player, and Khalil obviously went to a smaller school, most guys do not become that. anyone listening to this that follows, if you went to a big school, Ohio State, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, whatever, USC, Oregon, and you kind of loosely follow recruiting, you know that most of your guys, you read about these huge recruits, a percentage of them, 30%, become like legitimate impact players. Another percent just become starters. And then probably 25% become irrelevant, transfer, and never play. That's just the nature of the sport of football. So I think it's going to be very, very fascinating to watch people investing into 18-year-old guys. I think for every person that, tried to get in Tiger Woods when he was 15 years old, there have been a lot of Tiger Woods before and since that did not become Tiger Woods. There have been a lot of Jadeveon Clowneys or Julio Jones that were the number 1 recruit and then the number 1 overall pick or number 6 overall pick, whatever Julio was, that were undrafted free agents or were not very good college players. So it's a fascinating thing that it's gonna take some time to play out, but I already see the overreaction to think every single kid's gonna get millions upon millions of dollars. Maybe at first, but eventually some of these kids are gonna have to produce. And that's what I already see. Like, I don't know. Some of these guys are just not going to live up to their money.